Okay, we've been looking over the last couple of weeks at LASCAD, Denver International Airport and Heathrow. And I just want to go through just a little framework so that we can actually start having a discussion about what we've learned with all the work you've done. Because there are really 6 fundamental questions. They were originally codified by an English author back in the end of the 19th century, the guy who wrote the Just So stories, and in there's a story about he was talking about someone who could learn everything from his 6 friends, and their names were what, why, who, how, where, and when. And if you actually think about that, those 6 questions allow you to find out almost anything you need to know about any particular situation. And when we get onto the Zachman Enterprise Architecture Framework, we'll see that the 6 columns, which have all sorts of businessy sort of names, are also subtitled what, why, who, how, where, and when. And so I want to introduce you to that little framework now in a very explicit sort of way, and then go through those as we look at common themes coming from LASCAD, Denver International Airport, and that Heathrow Terminal 5 problem. And you can always add a few extra words onto these. So the crucial questions, although the projector is kind of giving us an interesting picture at the moment, are what, why, who, but it cannot not just be who, but it's also who was affected, who did it, and so you can wrap around each of these extra variations. How did it happen? How was it fixed? What happened? What was the result? And so, as I say, you can add different qualifiers to each of those 6 questions and come up with a whole extra sets of questions which are useful. So you've got the how, the where, the when, and how much. So with the how, I'm expanding that here to how much, and how much resource, how much money, all sorts of interesting variations. So if we think about those questions, what I want you to think about, and I'll give you about 15 minutes to start thinking about that and applying that to the analysis that you guys have been doing for the last week or so. To think about the when question, what's the timeline? Because that timeline, that sequence of when things happened, when decisions were made, when the impact was felt, kind of helps us to understand quite a lot about what was going on. We can also apply in that timeline, when was the project expected to be finished, when did the sponsors want it to be finished, and when did people first start identifying significant problems or issues with the overall project plan, the resource plan, the features that were going to be built into the services, and so on. So you can actually populate that timeline with a lot of interesting information from which you can learn some very, very valuable lessons. Using the how and the why, what caused the failure? Was it gross over-optimism? Was it incompetence? Which of the stakeholders were affected? Who? The who question. Because again, if we understand the who, again, both in terms of those who were responsible, those who created the problem, those who kind of almost by accident caused it because they led in the wrong sort of direction, with the wrong set of culture perhaps. We can begin to understand the sort of people effects, people behaviour that was causing the problem, as well as who got hurt. Was it financial hurt? Was it reputation that got hurt? And if you look at the whole range of the sort of problems over the last 2, 3, 4 years, the company's actually got really serious reputational damage. And it's not just from IT projects, it's from all sorts of project failures, all sorts of business situations, where understanding the type of impact to the different stakeholders is also incredibly valuable as a lesson for things we need to avoid. The what, the how much, what were those impacts? You see, we're starting this module from this perspective of failure, because the IT industry is so rich in examples of projects and services which haven't actually lived up to their promise, where enormous amounts of money has been lost, people haven't got the benefits that they wanted, the shareholders haven't got the profitable company that they were expecting when they kind of nodded through big projects. The customers have had problems. So by looking at the causes of failure and then these 6 questions, we begin to build a framework for ourselves of questions we need to ask of our projects before we launch them. And what I'm really doing here is building gently to this year into the idea of information governance, which you'll cover in a year or two's time in Sustainable Information Corporate Governance, where we're looking again the same sort of side, but looking at the big frameworks which are used out there and can actually deliver more successful projects if we look at those questions, think about the answers, and then take account of those answers and to develop our project plans, our technology plans. And so often we don't actually do that in business. Here is the vision, this is the direction we're going to go on, and well, don't tell me what the problems are, just go do. Here's the resource, here's the timescale, here's the overall functionality we want, but we'll chop that back time and time again as we run into issues. And you then end up with something that delivers only 10, 12, 15% of what the business really needs to actually be successful. What the customers need to be happy customers. Because if you have happy customers, you will have a successful business. As soon as you get unhappy customers, your business is starting to go away from you. And so all of these questions about failure are really, really important as a way of making progress and being successful. If we don't use history, we are condemned to repeat history. So we need to know the history and understand the lessons that come from history, and these are sort of approaches that will help us to avoid living in the past and repeating and repeating and repeating all those failures. And sadly, the evidence at the moment has been for the last 20 odd years. The IT industry, by and large, and the users of IT have failed to learn properly the lessons from the past, which is why we still, 20 years on, even though we know the causes of failure, we even know from the Standish Group report how to have successful projects. They have been publishing for about 18 years now, guidelines as how to have successful IT-related projects. And the number of failed projects is only reduced by about 8 to 10%. The number of successful projects has increased and is stabilizing at around about 35%. And projects which are challenged and relatively unsuccessful, over budget, late and so on, has continued on at around about 40, 45, 50% all those 20 odd years. We know what we need to do, and yet we still don't do it. Now, I'd like you guys to have a really good feel for what we should be doing based on analysing history. And these 3 cases are quite interesting examples. Yeah. So look at the data, those 3 case studies that you've now got copies of, and find out what actually does it mean. Now, what were the causes? Why did it happen in the way that it did? And then look into some of the literature like Standish Group, and some of the other ones to see do those ideas, or does that analysis that you've come up with, does that really match what the literature has been saying about the causes of failure and who is affected by some of these problems? But then, having decided whether your findings agree or disagree with the literature, you know, those experts who've been analysing this stuff for years and years and years, if your analysis agrees with the literature, the theories, you might say, why do you agree with it? And if your analysis does not agree, because you understand it, with the literature, why not? And the most important thing is not whether you do or do not agree with what's in the literature in terms of that analysis of failure, but it's, do you really get to understand why there are those differences? It's part of what we call reflection. Not the reflection in the mirror, but it's that thinking that says, this has happened, now I want to understand why. Why am I different? Why are my thoughts different? And there may be very, very good reasons, because you found other evidence, perhaps, that casts a completely different light on the situation to what other people have found, because you found some really interesting sources out there that show something different. And you lot are bright enough to be able to do that. That's why you're here at university. And I have every confidence that you can do it, and you will do it. And you will reflect, and you will learn from that and understand it. So first step, in 1, 2, 3 groups, have a little discussion about those 6 questions relating to LASCAD. And then in about 10-15 minutes time, we will have a big discussion where we'll pull all of your ideas together. Okay? So concentrate on LASCAD to begin with, and then we'll move on to Denver and then on to Heathrow, and then we'll pull a whole lot together during today's activities. Okay, guys?